Have you ever thought of what creates life on Earth? Some might argue that it's water, and others might argue it's the chemicals from millions of years ago. But I am going to argue that it's the sun. When most people think of the sun, they think a big ball of fiery gas in the sky. But more than that, it has a life. It has phases it goes through, some that take millions of years, some that take thousands. And through that, we have much to learn about the sun and how it impacts us on Earth. All stars with a similar mass to that of the sun start in what's called a nebula. Nebula is actually Latin for cloud, and to a certain extent, they do look like clouds. But instead of being clouds of water vapor, they're clouds of hydrogen, helium, plasma, and dust, which is a perfect combination for a star. These clouds, however, have a very low density. Their density is approximately 1 atom per cubic centimeter. For reference, the density of Earth's atmosphere at sea level is 30 quintillion molecules per cubic centimeter. Over time, however, this mass starts to conglomerate mass, and once it has enough mass and an outside influence such as the shockwave of a supernova acts on it, it starts to collapse in on itself. This is when it reaches the second stage, the protostar phase. This phase is very important as it marks the start of the heating up process. As the star starts collapsing in on itself, the internal heat grows, and the hottest part is the core. Around it, a ring of gas forms and has bipolar jets. The ring of gas is actually known as a protoplanetary disk. Bipolar jets are just two continuous streams of gas emitting from both ends of the protostar. Protostar bipolar jets actually have bursts once in a while, which cause massive shock waves to occur. These shock waves produce excess radiation, which is then absorbed by the rings of gas and sent back at the star at longer wavelengths, giving the star its energy. The phase of a protostar lasts until the star stops collapsing in on itself, which is usually about 100,000 years. After that, it becomes what's known as a T-Tauri star. Ironically, these have a very similar temperature and look a lot like a main sequence star. But they're much more violent. As you can see, they have many sunspots, and their stellar winds are so powerful, they heat up the protoplanetary disk a lot. More than that, they run off of the gravitational energy from the collapsed mass from the protostar phase. Since there's a lot of mass that collapsed in from the nebula, they have a lot of energy to run off of, which is very useful because the stage lasts for about 100 million years, since it takes a long time for the internal energy to be high enough to be able to start nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion is very important for a main sequence star, which is the next phase, because that's when the hydrogen in the star starts fusing into helium, which is why I said hydrogen and helium are very important in the nebula phase. The average star can last anywhere from 10 million to 10 trillion years in the main sequence star phase, depending on its mass. For stars with a similar mass to that of the sun, they'll last for approximately 10 to 12 billion years. Our sun has lived for 4.5 billion years, so it'll live for another 7.5 billion years. This is a picture of the sun from 2010. As you can see, it has very weak stellar winds and very minute sunspots. When this main sequence star starts to run out of hydrogen, it becomes what's known as a red giant, which is when the star starts to collapse in on itself when it has a lack of hydrogen, but the hydrogen left in it caused it to heat up and the process of fusion to become very, very, very compounded. So it starts to generate energy very quickly, and that causes the walls of the sun to expand outwards as more energy is being generated. When this happens, it'll become very large until it runs out of all of its hydrogen. A star such as our sun will become so big it'll envelop Mercury and Venus and burn Earth. But we don't have to worry about that for another 7.5 billion years. Finally, it becomes what's known as a white dwarf, which is when it runs out of hydrogen, it becomes so dense that it cools down and becomes a white dwarf, where it feeds off of its excess energy until it dies out.